So welcome back to our postural series. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to approach it by showing and sharing with you what I do to maintain the best posture I possibly can. Now by no means is my posture perfect, and I understand that. I have a little bit of a forward head position, I have a little bit of a rounded shoulder position, especially when I was younger, but I've done some things over the years to go ahead and train that, and I want to go ahead and share that with you. Now, a couple of things that I want to touch on that I didn't in the first series. Number one, what about the cervical spine? A couple of you have already asked me about that since the previous discussion. And the way I look at the cervical spine is this. The head is a ball that's sitting on top of our shoulders. And it's very much influenced by how we position our lower body. So if I position my shoulders forward, my head is going to have to compensate by extending up. If I go ahead and I extend myself way back, my shoulder head is going to compensate by coming forward. So as a result of that, the head and the cervical spine is really going to follow, in my feeling, going to follow the lower body. And especially because visually, the goal of our eyes, or the goal of our body is to keep our eyes level so that we can go ahead and maintain good equilibrium. So with that said, I want to go ahead and share with you now how I go ahead and build in mobility training into my workout that helps me improve my overall posture. So very much every morning I'm going to start out by mobilizing my thoracic spine using a foam roll. Now what you want to keep in mind is that even though we're going to be mobilizing the mid-thoracic spine, the hips, the cervical spine, the shoulders, everything else is going to have to be somewhat integrated into that, because the bad news is here that we can go ahead and be mobilizing our mid-thoracic spine, but our hips can be compensating. So we're truly not really mobilizing. So it's very important that you have a mindset that all the areas have to be somewhat integrated, and be mindful of each and every area as you go through your mobilization of each and every area. So let's start though, because I like the mid-thoracic spine to start out with. I like to go ahead and just place the roll horizontally and position myself so that the roll is right between my mid-shoulder blades. I'm going to support my head typically as I start to roll through the roll, and I'm going to make sure that I do a lot of work on extension and opening up my shoulders. This seems to go ahead and it's an easy way for me to get started in the morning. I'll go ahead and do that. Once I get that moving, I'm going to go ahead and bring my arms into it a little bit to really open up my chest and start mobilizing and stretching that. Now, keep in mind, my low back wants to arch right now to make up for the lack of movement through my mid-thoracic spine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try to posteriorly tilt just a little bit as I mobilize through my mid-back and mid-spine so that I'm not arching a lot through my low back. I'm also going to go ahead and support my head as much as I need to, and I'm going to try to open up that rib cage. Now, because we're mobilizing through our mid-thoracic spine, breathing is going to become pretty important. And I'm not a great breather. I'm working on it, but I'm not awesome at it. One of the things I try to really focus on is trying to really relax into my breathing and try to keep my breathing primarily nasal type breathing, so it allows me to relax and move through. The last thing I'm going to do is, as I go through this, I'm going to become more active with my hands and arching through. Sometimes I'll even bring in a very light weight, like a medicine ball, to go ahead and just help me mobilize a little bit more in different directions as I work through. So you could easily go ahead and just hold it there and do some posterior pelvic tilts while you're supporting it, or you can go ahead and be active and working through. But the thing you'll find is your cervical spine is probably going to get a little bit fatigued, especially those short cervical muscles. So come in and support as much as you need to and roll through there. But I like to spend about 2 minutes just mobilizing through and opening up that mid-thoracic spine. It seems to be a good starting point for me to go ahead and start my mobilization and my warm up every morning, and I'm emphasizing a mid-thoracic mobility. Now, can you go ahead and also do it lengthways? Absolutely. You can come in here and knock out and work it this way as well and work through here. I just find that doing it more horizontally is a little more effective. So that's how I attack my mid-spine mobility to help me improve my posture. I think the next key area that we got to go ahead and attack in our hips is our hip flexors and our quads. These seem to be the areas that result in, when they're tight, they're going to cause me to go into a lot of extension through my lumbar spine, which then is going to have to cause me to counterbalance by forward shoulder positioning, again, to keep my head level, which is going to be the goal of our posture. So with that said, I think I want to show you how to attack your hip flexors and quads. Now, there's a very simple way to go ahead and do that, and that's just to go ahead and use this elevated position to go ahead and start stretching out your hip flexor and quads. Now, keep in mind that we can go ahead and open this up, but our mid-thoracic spine, our cervical spine, can very easily compensate for this tightness, so we don't really stretch. So I want to show you some key things about stretching your hip flexor and quad that are going to influence helping your overall posture. First and foremost, we want to go ahead and open up this anterior hip. That means we're going to stretch the quad. Well, by flexing the knee, we're going to immediately put the thigh on stretch. By tightening up the glutes, we're going to push that anterior hip forward, that hip a little bit into extension, which is going to open up our anterior hip, hip flexors, and so forth. Now, once again, with that in place, what about our mid-thoracic spine? Well, we could easily go ahead and just bring a band in. By putting our hands over our head, that's going to engage my trunk. So now I have a great hip flexor quad stretch that's opening up my hip. And I could easily go ahead and bring in the band to stretch through my shoulders. But the key thing is, can I maintain this opening up in this hip position? Obviously, the higher this foot is elevated, the more stretch on your thigh. So bring that foot down if you need to, all right? If you need to go ahead, just go to a flat surface, like so, and start here, that's fine. And again, same conscious awareness of the anterior hip. But I like this stretch to go ahead and open up my hip flexors and quads, because now I can go ahead and once I get this engaged and I know what I'm doing here, I can now bring the band in and very easily, just what I like to do is just hook my hands through it and just start stretching out my shoulders, going ahead and working lateral flexion or abduction of the shoulders, but just opening up the chest. But the whole time, I've got this anterior hip, thigh engaged and being stretched. I like this stretch a great deal. Now, you'll also see me do a lot of band stretching of my hips. You have that information already in the band gym. I'd recommend you review that and how I stretch the anterior hip. Specifically, you might find that the everything stretch that I show you in the exercise vault might be a great way to go ahead and another exercise that you want to start incorporating. But if you're looking for a simple way to open up your anterior hip and shoulders and have your trunk engaged at the same time, I like this stretch, and I like going ahead and just opening up and working some rotation, stretching with the band, and really getting my chest opened up while my anterior hip is getting lengthened out as well. Keep this position in mind, because we're going to come back to this when it comes to strengthening our body and making sure that we have good opening up of our hip while we're strength training our body. We'll talk more about that later. Now let's go ahead and let's attack also some hamstring work. I like to attack my hamstrings utilizing the band more effectively than most things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and again, I'm going to take you through some key elements to stretching out that hamstring. Now, first and foremost, that opposite leg has to be firmly attached into the wall. I like taking the band, flipping it behind, reaching up inside, pulling my shoulder blades down. So I keep my hands, my arms in contact with the floor, which engages my mid-thoracic spine and my mid-shoulder blade area. so that now as I stretch out my hamstrings, I can keep my chin tucked. So you can use the floor to keep my chin level, my face level, my cervical spine in place. My elbows stay down onto the floor. So now all I have to do is just press with my heel. Obviously, I'm going to keep my left leg flat and it's secure on the floor, so that hip flexor and quad on that left side has to stay open. And again, now I have all three areas: cervical spine, mid spine, and left opposite side hip flexor locked down, so that I can now go ahead and work good hamstring flexibility. Now you can veer it off. You can work more hamstring into a medial hamstring, and you're going to find that coming across is going to be much more challenging, but you can work more lateral hamstring. You're also going to feel some nerve tension stretching potentially, where you're going to get some burning behind your knee. Just keep working into the stretch and back out of it as you do it. When I switch, I just put the other foot in, place my right foot up against the wall, tuck my chin onto the floor, reach up, pull my elbows down, keep my shoulder blades engaged, and just work at pressing my heel towards the ceiling to emphasize stretching that hamstring out. And then I will go ahead and work different patterns while I'm doing it. Also, keep in mind, you're always going ahead and focusing on breathing and making sure that breathing is staying consistent through the nose, and that you're staying relaxed as you're going through that hamstring stretching. You've seen me do this a lot, where I'll work on shoulder distraction, and I think that's an important element of postural mobility through your shoulder. And so if you want to learn more about the distraction series, you can find that in your exercise library under the mobility training to go ahead and review that. But I think going through and spending 2 to 3 minutes a shoulder distraction is always important, especially before any upper body workout. However, to zoom in more closely on postural training, I'm going to go ahead and use my Y's, T's, and W training that I've gone ahead and used for several years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a yellow super micro band to my bar. I want it as a relatively high attachment point, and I want a relatively small bar, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through Y's, T's, and W's. Now, for many of you, Y's, T's, and W's, you're probably familiar with it because people do it against the wall, which is a great way to go ahead and do it. I find that I struggle with that because, again, I don't have quite the strength to go ahead and challenge that. So I go ahead and hook up a band using a horizontal vector to now go ahead and take myself through my Y's, T's, and W's. Now, the key is there's several places that you can compensate with this. So let me take you through how I use it and try to avoid compensation through my trunk and hips. First of all, let's go through the movements. So we're talking Y's, T's, and W's. So we're going to start here with Y's, go out to T's, and go into W's. Now the band pulling me back is going to increase, obviously, the passive overpressure on the stretch. And because my hands are pushing against the band, it's going to also create some stabilization through my shoulders, specifically my rotator cuff, so that I can very easily go through the movements of Y's, T's, and W's. W's will be the most challenging. That's where you'll want to go ahead and go into a lot of low back extension. Here's a couple of things you can do to prevent that. Go into a staggered stance. That immediately is going to allow you to keep your trunk in more of a neutral position as you go through these movements. Another thing you can do is you can drop down into a half kneeling position. By shortening the lever arm of your lower body, you now can go ahead and lock your trunk in much more effectively using the hip flexor stretch that we just talked about initially, and then going through your Y's, T's, and W's there. Elbows forward when you're into your W position is really important. Can you get those elbows forward as you do that? You could also go to a double kneeling position, but again, now you're going to have to rely on your trunk more to keep you stable, as well as locking your glutes so that you're not arching through your low back for compensation. Last position, or last thing about this position is You can also go ahead and do it in a prone position to emphasize more passive overpressure. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take myself down into this position. I'm going to set my glutes, put my position, my head down on the floor, go into my Y's, T's, and W's. Now, by using it in that position, the band becomes an immediate assistive tool that's taking me further into the range of motion. So it's going to be a great way to increase the range of motion of your shoulders without your trunk compensating, because the floor is going to act as kind of an artificial stabilization and allow you also to have some great feedback to keep your postural alignment while you're going through it. I think you'll find that to be really effective. So Y's, T's, and W's are an exercise that I will incorporate into my warm-up routine to improve my overall mobility of my shoulders while maintaining good trunk control and good hip activation.